Welcome to this evening's event entitled Looking for Paul. I'm Helen Davis. I'm on Unison's NEC, and I'm also branch chair of Barnet Unison local government branch. Paul Holmes is branch secretary of one of the 10 biggest branches of Unison and has been elected to Unison's NEC 7 times and is currently standing in the Unison General Secretary election. But who is Paul Holmes? When someone asks us to vote for him, it is a big ask. Who are we being asked to place our trust in? Where does he come from? What does he believe in? Who really is he? When we elect someone as General Secretary, we are giving them great responsibility. Whilst politics is about policies, plans and programmes, there is also a part about the personal. Where does this person come from? What makes them tick? And what are their beliefs rooted in? Tonight is your chance to find out about Paul's persona. We are extremely honoured to have with us film director Ken Loach and screenwriter Paul Laverty. They will be introducing clips from their films and discussing with Paul the issues facing working class people and the need for trade unions to have working class leadership that understands and relates to those issues. So without further ado, we go looking for Paul. And just to give you a heads up about how the meeting will be organised, I'll be introducing the clips. There'll be a bit of a discussion between Ken, Paul and Paul. And there will be time at the end for a general discussion. So we'd like to encourage people to put questions into the chat room, which we will select a number to deal with towards the end of the meeting. So the first clip that we're going to be looking at is from the film Sorry We Missed You. It's actually the trailer, and I wondered if Ken and Paul Laverty can introduce that. Say a few words.
Fire away.
It's Paul and I had talked for over the years about how work has changed, how work has gone from secure 8-hour-a-day job with holiday pay and sick pay to casual work, to 0 hours, with none of the basic trade union rights that people fought for over decades, and the insecurity that comes from that, the poverty wages that comes from that, setting people against people, and the level of exploitation, how that has increased. It seemed to us a story that really hasn't been told. So Paul, we talked about it, and Paul, we did some exploration. Paul did all the research, and I just wanted to say in parenthesis, the directors tend to get a lot of publicity, writers less so. In our case, it's an absolutely 50-50 partnership. One of us is Morecambe and one Wise. Not sure which is which, but it's a partnership of equals. And the writing is Paul's, the characters are Paul's, and that's really important that people know. So we talked about it, and then Paul sketched the characters. Do you want to follow that up, Paul?
Yeah, well, yes, well, it was. We felt it was a continuation of many of the obsessions we've had over the years, and it's interesting too. We'll link back to Bread and Roses, and we did, another one. It's a Free World, which touched on the world of work, which is so significant for us. So as usual, and I must say this is a great opportunity actually, because in the course of doing the research and digging around, you always meet some wonderful people. But a key contact for this one with the care workers was a young trade unionist, Sophie Sherritt with Unison, and she was absolutely marvellous, and she opened many doors to us. She talked in detail about her own work and the detail of that work, and she introduced us to lots of friends. And that's the beauty about digging in and meeting people, because they share their lives with you. You can't write about care workers or drivers unless you're with them. You actually imagine life in their shoes. And so that's a very enriching experience for us. And over the years, Ken and myself have always felt that, a key part of filmmaking is actually listening to people. And it's not to copy people. You can't copy a screenplay or a film off the street. But what you have to do is occupy that space and be in their shoes. And I'll just give you one tiny little example of this. This is after the film was made, right in the middle of COVID. It's only a couple of weeks ago. We made, the film involves, drivers. Ricky is a driver in the film, but just very, very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to a driver. I'm actually looking on the street now out the window where I met him. And he looked exhausted. It was 10:30 at night. And I realized that he'd been working 14 and a half hours that day, 14 and a half hours. So there we were clapping on the doorsteps, key workers. That had recently stopped. And there he was doing a 14 and a half hour shift. The man was wrecked. He was exhausted. And during that period, of course, Jeff Bezos had gone on to make another 30 billion. That's how much his values were increased. So there we were, having made this film. And there we are all these years later, a man working 14 and a half hours a day. It was just absolutely remarkable. So it's actually when you see their faces and listen to them, understand their day, break it down, see they've got no time to have proper lunches, pissing in bottles, all this type of stuff. It's being with them that gives you the energy to try and tell these stories.
Okay. So, roll film.
You name it, I've done it. Concreting, plumbing.
Is that you two?
I've done it all.
So why'd you give it up?
He's just gone from job to job.
There's always someone on your back, isn't there?
Come on, we've got time to make up, let's go.
I'd rather work on my own now and be my own boss.
Let's just get a few things straight at the start, though, shall we?
Hi, Rosie.
Wake up. Dad will go mental if you miss school again.
Now, if you don't move, then you're going to get a ticket.
Oh, Rosie.
You're finna with a laugh.
You don't work for us, you work with us.
0-hour contract to get paid for the visits.
Keep this happy.
Get it.
Yes.
They track every parcel, don't they? To the front door and the back door. Even if you put one in the garden shed, they know where it lands. Fucking hell! There's a dog round there with massive teeth. I think it stuck a chunk out of my ass.
This decides who lives and who dies.
You were snoring.
It wasn't me, it was your mum. Say it's for Mr. Campbell.
Robert, no. Keeps on parking in my parking space.
I don't get paid till they get delivered.
It's my night with my family. It's a no. I'm not doing it.
I just there was some problems with my teenage son. Have you been on the train tracks and the roofs?
This is 2 days in a row.
Just knuckle down.
This is another £100 fine and a sanction.
Otherwise, you're just going to end up like... Well,
thank you.
I never thought it'd be this difficult.
I just want things to go back to normal.
You do more for me than you'll ever know.
You've got the best thing in life here. You've got a family that care about you.
How does your company get away with this? This is my family.
Thanks for the great day.
And I'm telling you now, nobody messes with my family.
Master of your own destiny, Ricky. You up for that?
Yeah. This is where it's at. Vindaloo. Got to be hard to take this stuff, do you know what I mean? So,
all right, then.
Luckily now.
Welcome back, everybody. Over to Paul Holmes now to give us his thoughts about the footage that we've just seen.
I'll say a couple of things because I listened very closely to what Paul said. And I'll start off with a Morecambe and Wise analogy, really, because my mother were in the same class at school as Ernie Wise, just outside of Wakefield. And he was a member of the National Union of Railwaymen, and he worked as a railway signalman near Wakefield. So it is a world where people express, and it's really important to listen. You can't demand from people for them to tell you what life's like. It doesn't work like that. They have to trust you, really, to tell you what it's about. And what that film's about is this quote from Big Bill Haywood, the American miners leader in the 1920s, who said, every rich person that's got a dollar that they didn't earn, a poor person earned it and didn't get it. And that's what that film's about. And that's what sick pay is. And that's what working 14 hours a day and pretending to be self-employed. That's what it's about. It's somebody taking your dollar, them dollars that they've got in the bank are your dollars that you haven't got in the bank. And that's what the film meant to me. The film would make you want to cry because it's so realistic, but its life was lived by millions of people. And what it is this. And sometimes people tell you something, and it's 20, 30 years later before the penny drops. And I remember a coal miner telling me halfway through the miners' strike that the miners' strike was nothing to do with coal. It's absolutely got nothing to do with coal, Paul. If they can get us to work 14-hour days on the minimum wage, they'll start opening pits up. It's about what terms and conditions we work under, that we do have a 7.5-hour day, that we do have paid holidays. Let's not forget, paid holidays didn't come in this country till we got 2 days in 1934. And I think what the film reveals is a winding back of the clock to what our grandparents thought had disappeared forever. I think that's what it tells you. It tells you that, you know, before the First World War, the most casualised work in the country was dock work. Immigrant Irish labour worked on the docks and was seen as unorganised. And that's what they're returning us to now. They're returning us to nothing but the basic minimum. And that's what it's about. It's about telling you what impact that has on domestic relationships, on domestic aspirations, on family life, on people really who just want the basis of life and are not being allowed to have it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul?
Yeah, I think it's important for those who haven't seen the film. It's the story of a driver, Ricky, who is drives for one of the big delivery companies, and he's so-called self-employed, but of course in reality he is an employee of that company. He's just a driver, and he's caught in a trap because he has to put the family's already in debt. He has to borrow money to get a van. When he's got the van, then he's got to work a certain number of hours a week, or he's got to work night and day, really, to keep up the payments on that van. If he fails to work, then the company fine him, because unless he provides a replacement. And of course, often that's out of the question. So he's immediately in that trap. And his wife, played by Debbie, is a care worker who visits people in their homes on a 0 hours contract, paying for her own transport. And of course, the minimum wage, she might get the minimum wage for, say, a 20 minutes call. But then if she's on waiting for local buses for the rest of the hour, her minimum wage is gone because it's a third of the hourly rate. And so this is the trap that people are in, on both of them. And of course, Debbie is the agency. It's an agency, of course, that employs her, and they're constantly giving her new work that she can't fit in, or leaving her stranded without work. And this insecurity, as Paul has just said, this insecurity just eats away at relationships, and it eats away at their family life, because she's a brilliant mum, but she's not there for the kids because she's coming up to a busy period of tuck-ins and when they come home from school. So she's trying to manage it on the phone, their homework, where's their food, looking after them. And that's the crucible, really, that Paul Laverty wrote, of that family that catches them. And it's important people know the story, because then it makes sense. But as Paul Holmes said, it's a mark of how far we have allowed exploitation to increase. And it raises the big question of how do trade unions work? This has happened when we are organized. To an extent, we're organized. And why have we allowed that to happen? It's a big question that hangs over us. And I hope we can return to that later.
Okay. Paul, Laverty, did you want to add anything?
Well, I mean, again, I think it's really, really important too to remember it's just how technology is being used. And it goes back to basics again. It can liberate us or it can enslave us. But, you know, when you're out, I mean, I spent time with these drivers, and again, it's the devil is in the detail. When you see the stress they're under, It's absolutely remarkable. And there's so much lies and misinformation about it as well. I mean, I remember accompanying drivers who went out to a big, huge depot. Now, you know, Amazon will tell you that they clock on at a certain hour and it's all measured. But what they don't tell you is the drivers are there earlier to try and catch the first wave. And some of them can be there for an hour and a half before that. What you don't see really either is just the relentless pressure. They call it precisers. The parcel must be delivered within certain hours or certain times or they can get fined. And so that relentless pressure on them was remarkable. So it was total control, remarkable pressure. And it was really strange. One of the young lads who I spent a lot of time with and I'd accompanied him delivering the parcels, you saw him running every single day, not having time to eat and all stuff like that. When it came to when we presented the film at the end, I invited him back to join us because he was so helpful. And his friends told me that he was suffering mental health problems. But when you saw the day that he lived and the amount of pressure he was under, it's not surprising that so many people, you know, were having mental health problems. And another thing that we didn't cover in the film was the stories we told about accidents, of people being tired and exhausted, you know, and I think that's probably something else that's happening. So it actually diminishes everyone. It's a perfect regime, perfect technology. You know, the phone or the different, they called it the gun, measures every moment. It beeps if you're out of the car for more than 2 minutes. It knows where you are. And so they actually can monitor and enslave people in the most sophisticated fashion.
And can I just say one quick thing? What's interesting is, I mean, we had the election, you know, when Jeremy Corbyn lost and Johnson got back in. I mean, this is a huge issue for hundreds and hundreds of thousands across the country, millions probably, facing this level of insecurity and disruption of their lives and pressure and anguish and debt. And it's not mentioned. It's not mentioned. And it's a mark of how our democracy is just a facade for dealing with the real things that concern people. Because that should be front and center of what we're talking about, quality of life of people. And because, of course, it suits the employers, it suits, you know, to use the old term, it suits the ruling class to have increased this level of exploitation. So don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. It's a fact of life. It's a force of nature. It's beyond politics. This is the way the world is. No, it isn't. It isn't. We can change it.
Exactly. I'd like us to move on to the next clip, which is from I, Daniel Blake. It's the trailer that was used for I, Daniel Blake. So again, Ken and Paul Laverty, can you do a quick introduction?
Comrade.
You go first this time.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, it concerns the story of Daniel Blake, he's coming to the end of his working career, and he has a heart attack. But he's a man who's been working all his life. He's a very skilled artisan. He's a man who's, you know, got great skills. Like I say, he puts a pencil behind his ear. He doesn't know about digital and online stuff, but he could build you a house. A remarkably sophisticated job he can do. But what he can't do is he can't do the digital stuff. And anyway, in his hour of need after a heart attack, he has to apply for support. But what was remarkable, and the stories we heard again are just, you know, legion, and stories much worse than you could ever imagine. But he was deemed fit for work despite his heart attack. Now, it was really strange, Helen, because just 2 weeks ago, I was in Newcastle again. I went back to the same food bank that Ken and myself visited regularly. In fact, we actually shot a scene in there. And surprise, surprise, I met a man who'd just gone through that. He had a heart attack, but it was even worse. He'd actually been in a coma for 6 weeks, and he was still, they didn't believe that he wasn't available for work. They actually sent someone to the hospital to check. You know, the notes from the consultants and the doctors and nurses weren't enough. You know, so what you saw was, it opened up an incredible regime to us, you know, of conscious cruelty, of people who are in fear all of the time. It had to be digital by default. They're obsessed with the idea of reducing footfall. And so it's essentially about an older man trying to sign on and get some support after working all his life. It's as simple as that. And he meets a young family of people who, Kate is her name, with her 2 children, who can't get housing in London, and they come up to Newcastle because the housing is much cheaper. And it was remarkable, again, meeting the people, you know, in the food bank just 2 weeks ago. And what they said was that has now become much more, it happens much more significant. Many, many more people are coming up from the south because the housing is cheaper in the north. And what was also remarkable was, especially after COVID, was they'd started the sanctioned regime again, done by Osborne and Cameron. That was a vicious regime where millions of people were actually sanctioned. And so we have now in COVID is many, many people spending 35 hours a week looking for non-existent jobs. So that same system, that same cruelty that we touch upon with this family is still now in existence. And of course, the food bank was overwhelmed. Brilliant activists again, brilliant volunteers, and more actual brutal stories. So the sophistication and the determination to frighten people, to make people scared, the run around they get is exactly the same as it was in the film 3 years further on.
Okay. Ken, did you want to add anything before we roll?
No, we'll see the film.
Okay. Right. So film can go now, please.
Good morning, Mr. Blake. I'm appointed to carry out assessments for employment and support allowance. Can you walk more than 50 metres?
Yes.
Can you raise either arm as if to put something in your top pocket?
Yes. Can I ask you a question? Are you medically qualified? I've had a major heart attack. I've been told by my doctor I'm not supposed to go back to work yet.
I'm afraid you must continue to look for work, or your benefit payments will be frozen.
There must be some mistake.
If you've been deemed fit for work, your only option is job seekers allowance.
Well, I want to appeal.
You have to apply online, sir.
I was a carpenter. I've never been anywhere near a computer.
So you need to run the mouse up the screen. No.
No?
No, not like that.
I'm just going round in circles.
I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
I'm trying to explain to you a situation and you don't care.
Right.
I've got about 12 quid in my purse.
Do you know what? You've created a scene, all right?
Jesus
What am I
Christ!
supposed to do?
Who's first in this queue?
I am.
Do you mind if this young lass signs on first?
No, you carry on.
This isn't your concern. I want you to get out as well.
It's a monumental farce, isn't it? Looking for non-existent jobs. And all it does is humiliate me. You've done nothing to be ashamed of. You're alone with 2 kids. You've done amazing.
I've seen it before. Good people on the street. You could lose everything.
Well, I'm not going to give up. When you lose your self-respect, you're done for.
Okay, thank you for joining us again. Back to discussion. Over to Paul Holmes for your reactions about the clip that we've just seen.
Well, I remember, you learn things when you start work, or you learn things of older people that you were never taught at school. And I remember having a conversation when I was with my grandma when I was 8 or 9, because I thought charity was a really good thing. I thought that it were people who had something giving to something to people who hadn't. And my grandma hated charity. She loathed and detested it. Her husband were a coal miner. And she said, Paul, you've never known anger till you stand in front of somebody who's rich, who gives you an old torn dress that they no longer want. And they want you to curtsy and thank them for giving you. That's what charity is. Don't want second-hand clothes from rich people that don't want them. And I feel so strongly about benefits. I remember being somewhere once, and this is probably a parochial story about Wakefield, but in the pits, there used to be a bit of a joke that the electricians didn't work hard, that the coal miners worked hard and the electricians didn't. And I remember being somewhere once where Ian Duncan Smith said, we need to get people to work hard. And this coal miner or electrician said, look, I've never worked hard, but at least I've been near people who are working hard. You've never even been near them. And for me, this issue of benefits is crucial, because I heard some people talking in the pub the other night, some people going on the sort of normal triple that some people talk about in the pub. And until we talked about benefits, and then one of the three had been on benefits, and suddenly it was reality. I believe everything I read in the papers, except for those things of which I have had personal experience. And he suddenly said, you can't live on benefits. It's not possible. And I like the word benefits, because I want to know why there are 35,000 bottles of wine under the Houses of Parliament, subsidised for people to drink and claim. And that's not a benefit, but for hungry children to have free school meals in the school holidays is a benefit. I'd like to know who's writing the dictionary of benefits. I'd like to know how people are drinking wine, drinking champagne, eating three-course meals in the House of Commons restaurants, bobbing out for 10 minutes to vote against free school meals, then bobbing back again to finish the meal. And I think we need to be really clear when we're talking about benefits. Benefits are what ordinary working class people get. What they get is what the rich people get, is what they deserve. The first demonstration I ever went on was when the government reduced unemployment pay from full pay for the whole year to full pay for half a year. Can you imagine getting full pay for the whole year? That's what you should get. Unemployment is not your fault. But other people, like MPs, expect to get benefits and turn up for 10 minutes or not turn up at all. And I'd like to have a genuine conversation with Ian Duncan Smith about who's on benefit in this country and who isn't.
Okay. Ken and Paul, anything?
Yeah, Paul found a quote when we were doing it. I'd like to read from it. It's from an 18th century vicar, and he said this. It just shows you things don't change. He says, "Hunger will tame the fiercest animal. It will teach decency and civility, obedience and subservience. It is only hunger which can spur and goad the poor onto labour." And that's what it's about. It's making poverty so horrendous that you will take any job that is however exploited, however poor the wages, whatever the conditions. And there's always been a fear of poverty. Goes back to the sturdy beggars of the Elizabethan age, to the workhouse, and many families, including ours, had a folk memory of the workhouse and the people who had been put in it. And we're back to that now. We're back to that fear of the job centre, the work coaches who can just say, sorry, you're sanctioned. And that's 6 weeks. And when you sanction people and they have no money, what are they going to eat? How are they going to survive? They haven't got a bank account stacked with riches, and they know what they're doing. And Paul used the term conscious cruelty. It is exactly that. I mean, Duncan Smith knew what he was doing because the food banks were increasing in number massively, and now they're going through the roof. I mean, the latest figures from the Trussell Trust for a year, which ended in April this year, before COVID really kicked in, was 1.9 million food bags issued. 1.9 million, and how many of those go to kids? Obviously, when we did the film, there's over 500,000 kids. Now they reckon there are 1 million in food poverty. 1 million children won't eat unless somebody puts a can into a collecting box. How are we allowing that? And where are the unions to stand up and say, we're not having this? You cannot impose poverty and hunger on the citizens that have elected you. You can't do that. We have enormous strength if only we realised it, and we have allowed that to happen. And that's shame on the right-wing Labour Party that's been in power. It's shame on unions that haven't used their power when they had the opportunity. And we have allowed this extraordinary cruelty to be the norm. To be the norm. I mean, it's not seen as a scandal now that there are food banks. You know, it's an extraordinary situation to be in.
Another thing, just to add to that, Helen, was a thing that caught Ken and myself's attention right at the very beginning of this was something really, really remarkable. And I still find it fascinating. It's how they created that narrative. You know, YouGov polls revealed that the ordinary person thought that up to 35% of the of the welfare budget was fraudulently claimed. And then anyone who does the research properly will realise that it's actually less than 0.7%. I mean, the figures are absolutely remarkable, but they sold that grand lie. You know, they had the Murdoch's press, we had these horrible, cruel, vindictive and petty programs on, Channel 5, porn poverty, they really were. And of course, let's not forget how Osborne gave that remarkable speech at the Tory party conference about the twitching curtains, about the hard-working people, being subsidising, this lazy lifestyle. So it was a grand conscious design to seek a scapegoat. And then, actually the sanction regime started, with Blair. But what they did was they increased it massively. I can't remember the exact figures now, but it ended up with millions and millions of sanctions. And when Ken and myself were digging around with researchers and people, we found something absolutely remarkable too, because it's easy to say, in a kind of a rhetorical fashion, that this is conscious cruelty. But what really, really, as opposed to bureaucratic, screw up. But in the course of this, we met some marvelous whistleblowers who worked inside the DWP. And one character, a lovely man, showed us his an internal memo from one of the offices. And in it had his name and the names of all his colleagues, the number of sanctions they'd carried out that month. And then there was a covering letter from the area manager saying that only the 4 top people who had carried out enough sanctions for that month. And if they didn't improve, they'd be put on a PIP, this kind of Orwellian language, a personal improvement plan. So there we had it, the lies, targets, and Duncan Smith and particularly, oh God, I've forgotten his name now, and Osborne and all these people, they came up and gave information to select committees and said there was no targets. So for the record, they were lying through their teeth. And it was only by finding these internal memos that we actually had the confidence to say this is conscious cruelty and it comes from the top.
Okay, I'd like to go to one of the questions that has come through. It's from Catherine Leeds, and it's more aimed for Paul Holmes and ties in to the previous film, Sorry We Missed You, but also to the next clip that we're going to see around from Bread and Roses. So she says, Sorry We Missed You is a brilliant film about precarious contracts and all the consequences of those. How could Unison as a trade union better get to grips with the issues 0 hours and casual hours working cause our members?
Well, I've had experience of this, Helen. I always say at every meeting I ever address, when you see the members, there's only 2 questions they want to know. What's your plan? And have we got confidence in you to carry it out? And in Kirklees Council, where I work, we found out that literally hundreds of female staff who were working in home care were on 10-hour contracts, but averaging 32 hours a week for months on end and months on end. And the outcome of that was they were getting sick pay and holiday pay and pension on 10 hours, but they were needed for 32 hours. And we asked for the figures. I think it's really clear to ask the figures. Then it proves to everybody what's happening. And what we negotiated in Kirklees was because loads of women, particularly part-time women, don't get the overtime rate. But we negotiated in Kirklees Council that if you work more than 25% of your hours, and for a 10-hour worker, that'd be another 2.5 hours, you start getting the overtime rate at time and a half. And you'd be amazed how many women got offered 30-hour contracts the following week. It shot up, the average shot up to 30 because they didn't want to pay the overtime rate. And that's about having a debate with the members about it's like Paul said earlier, about the issues facing them, asking them what they're willing to do, asking them what's happening to them, coming up with a plan to solve it. That's what it's about. It's not about collecting subscriptions. That's not what being a union member is about. It's about a plan to improve the lives of ordinary people.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we should move on now to the film Bread and Roses, which is about organising precarious workers. Oh, maybe I've said too much already, giving the game away. So Ken and Paul, could you do us a proper introduction to the trailer that we're about to see?
Well, it's a story set in Los Angeles. Paul was in Los Angeles for a year, allegedly taking a course at the university, but in reality, being with the Mexicans and other Latinos who were working in the cleaning, doing the cleaners, janitors, office cleaners, janitors they were called. And they had a campaign called Justice for Janitors. And it's about how immigrant workers, many of them illegal, were organized into a trade union. The conditions they were in before, what they fought for, and what kind of tactics they used. So Paul, add a bit more to that.
Well, yeah, and well, they were remarkable people, and I met out there, and I joined their campaign. And maybe we could talk about this maybe after the clip. Actually, I'll maybe talk about this after the clip. Yeah.
Okay. And while people are watching, I'd like to encourage you once again to put questions into the chat room so we can feed them through to the discussions. Okay, so let's have a look at the clip.
In a new world.
Thanks for this chance. I will work hard.
She joined family, friends, and a new kind of struggle.
Go back to work. Get out of here.
I'm Sam Shapiro. I'm actually here with the Janitors Union. May I come in for a sec? 17 years ago, that cleaner earned $850 plus health plus sick pay. Los Angeles, 1999. You don't have a union deal? You get $575 plus nothing.
You didn't think we'd find out about your little meeting? No union, right? Right?
When the privileged make the rules.
Can I ask you something? What do you risk?
The workers make the minimum.
Sometimes I think, what is going to happen with me?
But a courageous view.
It is our right to organize.
Can make a difference.
We're gonna crash the party.
Lionsgate Films proudly presents a new film from acclaimed director Ken Loach.
I salute your courage, okay? Because it takes a lot of it. We want bread, but we want roses too.
Bread and Roses.
Sorry, we're back. Thank you. So Paul Holmes, you've seen the film or the clips anyway. Any comments?
One of my favourite books is a book called King Coal by Upton Sinclair, and it's set in the coal camps of mainly in California, pre the First World War. And one of the things he says when he goes, the lead character goes to work there, is, and the lead character is from a fairly wealthy background, is you have to get over this hurdle when you first arrive, because there's something like 60-70% of the people there don't speak English, they're Italian or they're Spanish or Slovakian. Is this feeling that somehow these people aren't human, they don't speak your language, they don't work like you work, and somehow they're below you, and you have to get over that. And it's only by getting to know people that particularly language barrier is very, very difficult. And one of the things that came out of the film, which I'd experienced myself, was really interesting. I remember once speaking to a council worker, and I hadn't seen his jumper. He said Kirklees Council, but he had his back to me, and I was asking him a question. And I asked him this question, and he turned around and he said, look, I'm not high enough paid not to wear a uniform. And that's a big thing for low-paid people. They have to wear a uniform, and it often designates what they are on the uniform. And they're invisible. People walk about as though they're not there. And they're treated, particularly in this campaign, it's been really interesting, the General Secretary campaign, because there's a lot of people supporting us who don't speak English as a first language. We've had translations on some of the broadcasts. But it's about ridiculing people. It's about making people make them look like the lower status and lower value where you can pay them less money. And in Kirklees, when we had the bin strike in 2018, 25% of the bin workers were Afro-Caribbean, who originated in the West Indies. And some of them were born in Jamaica, really strong accents. And I can't believe this happened. I can't believe it happened. In front of 90 bin workers, a manager asked a question. A Jamaican bin worker got up and then answered the question. The manager says, it's impossible to understand what you're saying. Sit down and shut up and don't speak again. That's in 2018 in a Labour council in Britain. Somebody can treat a worker like that. And that's what the unions are about. They're about dignity. And the best quote I've heard this year is from a chartist. It was in Trowbridge, I think it's in Wiltshire. I'm never certain it's in Wiltshire. And somebody asked him in the 1850s if he wanted bread. And he said, I'm not risking transportation to Australia, jailing and dying for bread. I want roast beef, plum pudding, a lot of beer, and a 3-day week. And that's what bread and roses means for ordinary people. They're not here to subsist. They're here to aspire for themselves and their families. That's what the film's about. And it's trying to unportray somebody as being subhuman and realise, like everybody else, they've got families and aspirations, desires and dreams.
Thank you.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
Is it okay just to come in there, Helen?
Yeah, sure.
Just very briefly, it's very interesting what you said about language, Paul, there. Very, very interesting, because when Ken and myself met these young activists in the SEI union, I mean, they were absolutely terrific. There was a young woman there, Rocio Sáenz, who's going to be, she's the highest ranking trade unionist in the United States now, I understand. But, this was about 20 years ago. And she was a fantastic young woman. But her first language was Spanish. And they told us that when they went along to the first trade union meetings, they were not allowed to speak Spanish, which of course meant that so many of their fellow workers couldn't participate in the union. This union was so old-fashioned and racist. And so these new breed of activists came in, and they were absolutely marvelous. And they realized, of course, that many of the most humblest jobs were done by people who were so-called illegal. They'd crossed the border, they'd left poverty and left war, much of it caused by the United States, which we saw in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, great abuses there. So many of the people that Ken and myself met were absolutely unbelievable. People who'd crossed, borders from Nicaragua and El Salvador, some heartbreaking stories, some heroic stories. I remember one lady told me how she'd saved for 3 years to get the money to go back. They crossed several borders, got to the border with the United States, were caught and sent back again. And what did they do? Their family saved for another 3 years and took the chance again. And those are the people who are working in some of the richest offices of Hollywood agents and banks in Los Angeles. And that's where we met the Justice for Janice campaign. And can I just say very briefly, what was remarkable about them was they enthused an entire community. They said, we are not just a trade union, we are a community. And what we have in common to change corporate power, we must collaborate and we must organize. So they worked with the bus users union, they worked with students, they worked with other trade unions, they worked with the churches. And so they said, this is a community against corporate power, which is making our lives miserable. Because don't forget, if these people were caught trying to join a trade union, they were threatened with the migra, they called it, with the immigration department, and you could send back home, which of course would mean doing this oddity once again. So there was great stakes, but the great thing about it was if they became a union, if they got a union contract, not only did the rates go up, which meant they didn't have to work so hard so they could see their families, but they got health care. And that was critical. And that was a very, very important plot in the film.
Can I just add one thing to that, Helen? Yep. The janitors won. They won union recognition, and they won decent rates of pay. And as Paul said, they won healthcare. So they won. They actually organized, and the victory was down to organization. And one of the reasons, you know, I'm really happy to support Paul, not Paul Laverty, always support him, but Paul, is because his emphasis is on the organizers. And it's the organizers doing the graft amongst the people working, the people they're representing, understanding them, seeing a way through, seeing what is needed, seeing how to organize, how to influence the people they're organizing against. That was the key to the success for the Justice for Janitors campaign. And they had all kinds of ways of intervening, you know, occupying the buildings where the cleaners were cleaning. But the people who were, and of course they were working for an agency, the people who were actually in the offices weren't their direct employers. So one key element was to make those people in the offices realize that they were responsible for the poverty wages and the exploitation, the sexual harassment and everything else that went on for the cleaners. And they did that by disrupting their activity, and it worked. It actually worked because they had to realize they could not live on exploited labor. But it was down to the organizers, the people right at the grassroots doing that activity, and their enthusiasm and their authority that the union gave them. And one of the fears with the way unions have developed is they've got the mansions in Euston Road and elsewhere, and in North London, around the railway stations, but have they got the organisers doing the graft? You know, the place of work, talking to people, being involved, as Paul Laverty said, making it a community. And that's what unions have got to be. They've got to be really embedded. And that's where the strength of the union needs to be.
Well, thanks. One question that we had come through from Cynthia, it says, why does work take centre stage in your films? But before I ask Paul Laverty and Ken to answer that, I'd like to go to Paul Holmes about what do you feel about films showing, should there be more films, or are there enough films which show work at the centre?
Well, work is at the centre of everybody's life. That's in the 97 and 98%, because it provides them with a standard of living. And, you know, I have no fear of new technology. And people have no fear. If you say to somebody, we want to replace half your job with new technology, and you're going to be working a 20-hour week, I think everybody would be really happy with that. But it doesn't say that. You know, I remember having an argument with my dad 20 years ago when he said, oh, but you're only on a 37-hour week. I used to work 50. And I say, yeah, but you were the only person earning a wage in our house. There's two people working 74 hours now for the same standard of living that you were working 54. And that's why work plays centre stage. In the film we saw earlier on about Sorry We Missed You, work dominates their life. And what's not portrayed on the screen or on television is real life. And I'll finish on this point. I grew up thinking that in the United States, everybody lived on Dallas and were oil millionaires or were drug runners in the Bronx. And then I suddenly thought to myself, at about 16, how are they the world's leading industrial producer if all they're doing is running drugs in the Bronx and partying in Dallas? And then I realized that America produced 5 times as much as any other country in the world at that time, but nobody was showing those lives. Bread and Roses shows them lives. It's everybody's life.
Okay, Ken and Paul, about work being centre in your films?
Well, I think there's 2 areas on the way you experience your life, really. One's in the family and in relationships, and the others at work. And at work you learn about interdependence, you learn about solidarity, you learn you make friendships there, you learn to cooperate, you learn that actually you work better when you work together with someone rather than competing against them. So and all the stories of your life are at work. I mean, many of our surnames come from work.
Yeah.
Work is an identity. Work is most of your waking life. And the connection between that and relationships and family life is vital. It determines who we are, the kind of choices we have. And that is our life story. And of course Paul Holmes, sorry, I hate to use people's surname because we're all pals really, but Paul makes a very good point, is that in most films, in most theatre, in most artistic endeavours, you don't have the social context in which people live. Because the choices that we have, the circumstances of our life are determined by our income, and that's determined by the work we do. And that's the big division in our society, isn't it? Those who get their income from selling their labour, and those who get their income from benefiting from other people's labour. And that's the big division in society. But it's the context in which people live is as Paul said, you see people who have a wonderful lifestyle, but nobody ever says where the money comes from. And I guess that's a question Paul and I have tried to tangle with.
And I suppose too, as well, I mean, drama works best often when it's examining how power works. And so it's inherently dramatic, and whether it's someone like, we did a film, My Name is Joe, is someone who's desperate to work. Sweet 16, it was a young lad in the Clyde, what was open to him if there was no work? Or those, many of the immigrants that we met coming up from Central America, because they couldn't work back home. They had no possibility of a dignified life. They were fleeing war. So what happens to them when they go up? And of course, they're exploited if they're not part of a trade union. So it's actually a very interesting way and a very dramatic way of seeing the choices that people make, how it affects their lives, how it affects their community, how it affects their children. And so it's a very, very rich area. And it's something I suppose Ken and myself and the people we work with have found endlessly fascinating.
Okay. Just for the people who are watching, we're going to open up now more into general discussion, and towards the end of the discussion, we will then be showing the clip of the film from the film Kes for the last 10 minutes. So we're aiming to finish certainly by 8 o'clock. So if people, that's just to give people an idea of how long we're on for. And we've got the questions are now coming in. June Jones says, how do you think unions should deal with the anti-trade union laws? So Paul, a general secretary of the biggest union, how are we going to deal with the anti-trade union laws?
Well, I think there's two parts to it. One is in Parliament, where Labour were in power from 1997 to 2010 and didn't repeal one sentence of Thatcher's and Major's anti-trade union legislation. So we need to deal with it there, because that's affecting people's standard of living. But I have no truck with it. When a worker is faced by something, there's only one rule for the General Secretary. You've got their back. You've got to have their back. I don't think any of them janitors in Los Angeles were thinking about how the law stood on things. The bloke in the tie and suit in the union headquarters were thinking how the law stood, but they were thinking how the law had threatened them. And for me, and I go back to the bin strike in Kirklees in 2018, which were a fundamental strike for us, really. I got phoned up in UNISON headquarters by the management to ask me to disassociate myself from the strike because it was an unofficial walkout. And that's the last thing in the world I'm going to do. I'm always going to say to the members, I've got your back. That's what you pay your subs for. That's why you show your loyalty to the union for. And the loyalty, this is the key, the loyalty is to the members. You can always tell a good union official, would they rather be speaking to the members or would they rather be speaking to management? I know which I'd rather speak to.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I agree with all that, of course. I think there is, I mean, it does stress, it does show the importance of the unions have a political representation. If we'd won the last election, well, the trade union, anti-trade union legislation could already have gone, because that would have been a priority. And I think we've got to make certain we have a Labour Party. If we're in the Labour Party, we've got to have a Labour Party that will repeal those anti-trade union laws. And one question, I mean, UNISON is not my union, so I'm really wary of saying this, but one question I would ask of all the candidates of my own union, BECTU, as well as all the other unions, is, will you support a Labour leadership that gives an absolute commitment to repeal the anti-trade union laws? If you call on your union and its representatives in the Labour Party to make that commitment, that you would not support anyone who would not absolutely commit to that repealing the anti-trade union laws. If they don't make that commitment, I'm afraid I would never be able to support them.
Okay. This might be good for Paul Laverty and Paul Holmes. This next question, Naomi Davis says, sorry we missed you, does feel like a winding back of workers' rights and terms and conditions. But also, do you wonder what the influence of American power has or is on our working conditions? And we've got an election coming up.
Yes, well, it's a terrific question, Naomi. Thank you for it. And I mean, I think what we've seen is the Amazon model. I mean, Amazon hires psychologists to make sure workers do not join a trade union. I mean, I've seen adverts for it. I mean, everything is to make sure that people are separated, that they feel isolated, that they feel that they cannot take them on. I mean, Amazon now is absolutely remarkable in its power. I mean, I've actually forgotten the exact statistics now, but I think I think halfway through COVID, Jeff Bezos had actually become $30 billion richer than he was originally. And that's not an accident, because it's a great big money-making machine, and they make sure that they will not allow trade unions, that everything is measured and monitored, that all the drivers, you know, are under complete control with the technology. And is that the model that we want? When this is what we saw with Sorry We Missed You. And other companies wanted to do the same. This is where the bogus self-employment came from as well. You know, not only do they undermine trade unions, but they've actually kind of they've claimed sovereignty over people's minds and consciousness when they've actually persuaded them that they're actually, you know, entrepreneurs. That's what fascinated us. So there's a whole great political and narrative battle, you know, about what's going on. And of course, they are absolutely committed 100% for an environment that will favour business. And right at the heart of that, they see trade unions as an enemy. And of course, God knows what's going to happen over there in the next couple of months. But believe me, even if Biden gets in, Amazon are not going to get much less strong, I don't think.
Okay. Paul Holmes.
Well, the American trade union movement, I don't think there's a union movement with a finer history. They've experienced it for 150 years, what's going on over there. And, you know, Bezos, I read this fact the other day, that if you'd have paid him £2,000 a day from the day that Jesus died, he would have got less money than he's got now. And that puts it into perspective, because there's a lot of days since that happened. And, you know, it's just naked, isn't it, what they're doing? I don't think the people who are doing it are any different in Germany, Britain, or America. They're the same boardrooms, they're the same multinationals. They just have different politicians fronting it in different countries. That's the name of the game. That's why there's 35,000 bottles of wine in the cellar of the House of Commons. And what it's about, it's about trying to dismantle anything that we built post 1945. And I think they're in for a shock, because I think what happened over free school meals has completely shocked them. I don't think they believe that how they talk and how they implement things. Suddenly, it consciously came across. A footballer stood up and said something about it. Can you imagine what would happen if the trade union and labour movement leaders stood up and said something about it?
Yeah. Okay, so changing the tack a bit, in relationship to demands that have been made during COVID period, Matt Tacey wants to ask Paul, Unison have come out for a 2K pay for all NHS, I think it means £2,000 pay rise for all NHS staff. However, a long way off other unions. I am a member of Nurses United UK who are going for 15%. What are your views?
My views are really clear. We need a united campaign of the 15 trade unions in the health service. And we need to juxtapose, don't we, the £3,360 pay rise for MPs with the no pound per hour pay rise for the health workers. And what will be serious is when the offer comes. The 15% offer obviously is far more tangible because it gives everybody more than £2,000. There's a wide disparity of salaries in the NHS. But I don't think we need to get hung up on what the claim is. I think we need to get hung up on what they're offering and what we're going to do about it if they don't make an offer. Because I think this is the mistake the government's making now. They're trying to face two ways at once at the same time. There is no money. By the way, if you want to set up a tracing and testing firm, there is some money. But if you want to work in the intensive care unit, there isn't any money. And that's the dichotomy of their problem at the moment. So I'm fully behind full 15% claim in the health service. But the important thing is to unite when we get the offer. Because at this moment, there's no offer. There is no offer from this government. And I think this government is completely exposed at this moment. All it's missing is a leadership against it.
Okay, well, this is a question everyone can join in, but more so Ken and Paul Laverty. Tony Wright asks, hi, we all know that the Tories and their friends will be making millions from COVID as thousands die. Ken and Paul, any plans to make a film showing the true picture?
I don't know. I think we'll be really glad if we can make another film, really. But I don't know about that. I think, it's interesting about filmmaking. Your politics inform the stories that you want to tell, but they can never define it. You can never have a checklist of here's an issue, there's a film. Here's an issue, there's a film. It's more nuanced, more subtle than that. And obviously all the experience taps into, what work you try and do, but it's not a kind of one-to-one thing where here's an issue I'm concerned about, there's a film in response. I think our thoughts on the world in general tend to distill into particular little relationships, little microcosms. And if you find the right story of a few characters that contain a contradiction within them or not, or something that has to be resolved, or something that is not sitting right, a family with an issue, and it's unraveling that and being truthful to the details of that, and the human responses. And if you get the story right, then you say everything you want to say about that situation and about the world in that for those people. And it's finding those little relationships, those little stories that actually shine a light right to the heart of how we live and the struggles we face. So that's the process. If you, it's a search for that gold, really, and you don't always find it. But you keep looking.
Paul Laverty, any plans for film under COVID?
I think Ken covered it pretty well there.
Okay.
The great problem with trying to follow the news is that filmmaking is such a long process. By the time you actually research it, you write it. Rebecca O'Brien, who is a very key member of our team as well, who's the producer, she does all the work in the engine room, finances it. And the time, Ken gets round with Colleen Crawford to do the casting, and then you actually shoot it and edit it and do the music and get it out. I mean, it's a long, long, long process. So if you follow the news, you can easily find yourself just out of whack with reality, really. So but I think Tony's right, because I think COVID has shone a great light on society. I think it's shone a light on class, and it's shone a light on a deep, deep inequality. So I mean, I understand his question, and I think it really, really does ask enormous questions about where we live. And actually, very, very interesting. I think it's asked enormous questions just about, the whole austerity policies. I mean, there's a book just written by Stephanie Kelton, who is from the United States, and she calls it the deficit myth. And how many people's lives, were destroyed, mostly many of their poorest society, who bore the brunt of the austerity policies after the financial crisis. And these economists now are actually examining the material, and they realize it was just all nonsense. We didn't need to do that. We have to have that tight austerity. We didn't have to have that tight punishment that we see in Daniel Blake with the sanctions. So I think it raises enormous questions about that as well.
Thank you. I'm going to roll two questions together here because they kind of might be helpful. Simon Fox says, Northwest region developed an organising academy. This should be rolled out. Any views? It's only in the Northwest, so somebody might have to explain to the rest of us what that actually looks like. And then Mr. Hazelbygrad, do you see a real risk of working from home under COVID-19, that if it really takes off, it's going to be much harder for workers to organise together? So that fits in with the organising question from the Northwest. Paul, what do you think?
Well, I think that too many people are worried about working from home as regards organising. I remember when we had the strike, can't remember what year it would have been now, probably about 2016, can't remember, a pay strike. And there was some worry that something like 70 to 80 of the staff who worked in housing benefits in Kirklees Council worked from home. They worked there permanently from home, that they process benefits from home. And people were worried that you weren't crossing the picket line and you weren't having to do that. Now, Kirklees Unison got a brilliant reputation of people not crossing the picket line. But actually, when we saw the figures after the strike, not one single person had worked in the strike from home. Would have been dead easy for them to do it, but they hadn't. So the worries about working from home and not about organising. The organising model in the Northwest is brilliant, should be rolled out across the union. But it's about going into the sticks and doing the business. It's always been about doing the business. When that bloke in Bread and Roses is running around that building, hiding from security, that's exactly what it's like, trying to get into buildings to organise. So what we need is people who's done that, not people who's gone to university and studied whatever philosophy, politics and economics, but people who's been on the shop floor and who studied trade unionism and organisation. We need to get them mentoring everybody, because it's all been done before. You just need to talk to the people who's done it right.
Okay.
Helen, can I just say one thing too? This was a question from my sister. She works at home, but she's saying, well, who's paying the electricity? Who's paying the extra heating? I mean, workers are paying for that. And and corporations, I think, will probably in time will see that they're going to scale back on these big buildings, rates, all questions of local tax. I mean, there's the potential of making massive savings, but again, it is who has power in that equation, and how is that money divided up? And you know, unless people are organising in a trade union, I fear that, you know, people in the home will easily be marginalised.
Just put a little slant on what Paul said. Paul before that, Paul said that a lot of young kids now are going to university who, you know, back a generation ago wouldn't have gone. And so I'm sure we'd all agree that knowing about politics and economics isn't necessarily a disadvantage. It's just you need to be able to get in there and do the job on the grassroots as well, and do it, you know, knowing how to function and having done the work. But it's I think it's okay to know about politics and economics. It's not necessarily a disadvantage, provided you can do the other stuff really as well.
Okay. Again, I've got two questions that I'm going to roll in together. Allotment lady says, Unison spends a lot of members' money on big court cases and has been successful, e.g. tribunal fees. There's also home care workers. But most of the work is done in the branches by volunteers. How will you support us better? And do you think, Paul, and maybe Paul and Ken, you're not members of Unison, but you might have a view anyway. Do you think that Unison is making the most of its 1.4 million membership?
Well, I know that it isn't. That, you know, the way forward for this issue, I believe, honestly and truthfully, you win any dispute by the easiest possible method. If you can win it with a phone call or a letter, that's fine. If you can win it by a legal battle, that's fine. But you have to, the term is leverage. You need to be able to have more leverage than the other side's got. And that's what organising is about. It's about that. So I've made a clear pledge in the election that we'll double the amount of money going to the branches, because you can't organise if you're not in the branches. You can't organise from prestige buildings on Euston Road. You can't organise from loads and loads of people going to conferences in suits, discussing issues. You can lead debates off, but deep down on the shop floor is where the work takes place. When I left school, you know, people were striking. Engineering were the other massive industry besides coal mining in Wakefield. And people were striking all over the place for the 35-hour week. This is 40 years ago, the 35-hour week. And we expected to be working a 30-hour week by the year 2000. Not expected, we were told we would be. And that's why the money's got to go to the branches, because that's where all the work is. The grassroots, you know, the game of cricket, if it ever existed in the 50s and 60s in local government and health service, doesn't exist anymore. There is, nobody wants to play cricket with us. It's like the Tory Prime Minister said in the 1890s when asked, is there a class war going on? And he said, well, there is, but there's only one side fighting. And that's what's happening at the moment. We need to tell our side, our leaders, that we want to fight, and you can only do that by giving the resources in the branches. So like the people in Bread and Roses, we've got the full backing on the shop floor. It's the only way you can do it.
So, Ken and Paul.
Yeah, well, it's another point. It's related to it, but it's another point, if that's okay, Helen. But I think the urgent need for trade unions to be active in the way Paul has just said is absolutely paramount. I mean, everything, the future of every working class family, every family hangs on that. And if you think back, I mean, when Thatcher came in, the trade unions were allegedly very powerful. And she introduced, I mean, it's all right to just to say this briefly, because I think it's a really critical issue and very, very illustrative of how trade unions worked. Thatcher attacked the people on three fronts: laws against trade unions, provoking strikes she could win, and allowing mass unemployment to rise. By withdrawing subsidies, factories closed. Suddenly there were 3.5 million people out of work. The trade unions, most of them, apart from the miners and rank and file organizations, most of the big trade unions just sat back and did a deal. They did a deal that allowed factories to close. They would negotiate redundancy payments, but they didn't use their power to say, no, you're not doing this. You're not going to inflict that. You're not going to turn areas of this country into the desolate wasteland that they became and still remain, some of them. They didn't do it. And they had the power, they didn't use it. And why? Because their politics at the heart of it are about compromise. And they didn't stand for the members' interests then, clearly, which was jobs, security, wages, conditions. They didn't do that then. And my fear is, when the problem strikes again, as we know it's coming, they won't do it. And I think a trade union that is based, as Paul has described so clearly, bases itself on the interests of its members, is identified with its members, is part of, is out of the, speaks the same language, is absolutely critical. And that change, if you could achieve that change, would absolutely be transformative in a way we haven't seen it. We've had good trade union leaders before. Yes, of course we have. They're in a small minority, but we've had good ones. And a good one now would make the world a difference to the ordinary people of this country. And that's why I'm really so pleased to be in the team, such as we can be.
Well, and with that, you answered Ev Doyle's question from Manchester. So you wanted to know why you were wanted you to say why you were supporting Paul. But thanks for answering that one. I think what we need to do now is move on to the final film showing that we've got, which is from the film Kes, was in the 1970s. So that it wasn't done in the 1970s?
No, even older than that.
Oh, wow.
It was 1968. God help us, that's 52 years ago. But we were in short trousers when we made it, Helen.
Well,
1968.
I just about existed at that time, so.
Yeah, it was in Hoyland. Shall I just introduce it?
Yes, please. Yes.
Written by a wonderful writer called Barry Hines, who lived in Hoyland Common, from a mining family, and the house overlooked the woods. And he and his brother trained the kestrel. His brother Richard trained the kestrel, and Barry wrote a book about it called The Kestrel for a Knave. And this is the film of the book, and it's about a lad, Billy Casper, who is a complete failure at school, but he finds a kestrel and he trains it. And while what lies in store for Billy is a life of semi-skilled or probably unskilled work, semi-skilled if you're down the pit, because obviously everyone has to have a measure of skill to work in the mines, but that's the industry. His brother Judd is a miner, and Judd asked Billy to put a bet on for him. Billy spends the money on food for the kestrel. He spends the money, and Judd, the horses would have won, and Judd would have had a week off work. And I guess it's not giving too much away to say Judd, in his rage, because a week off work, a week in the sun, meant something. So he kills the bird. And so the bird was flying free, and unlike Billy, but the bird is killed at the end. But anyway, we were lucky with the film. So lovely book, terrific people in it, and this is the trailer.
Okay.
Masterpiece.
Casper, on your feet. You were asleep. Where are you, Casper? I don't know, sir.
I know! You were! You were asleep! Why were you asleep? You irreverent scoundrel!
I don't know, sir.
They all seem to pick on you, don't they, Casper? Why is it?
Don't know, sir.
Is it because you're a bad one?
Maybe I am sometimes, but I'm not that bad, sir.
This is Billy Casper. Billy Casper cheats, steals, lies, fights. Because he has to. You see, if you're not like the others, if you simply don't belong, then you have to manage alone.
Casper! Casper!
Alone. Unless you have a friend, like Kes.
Come on, Kes. Come on, then.
A very special friend, who doesn't mind that you're different.
That prefect's looking all over the school for you.
Well, I went out then, sir, for a breath of fresh air.
And where are you going now?
Employment officer.
Field interview? Well, get off then, lad. And God help your future employer.
What makes Billy Casper the way he is? What's wrong with the boy? Perhaps it's a secret. A secret shared only with Kes.
Casper! Casper!
Always somebody, isn't there, eh? Somebody who wants to be awkward. Just like you, Casper.
Casper, you make me sick. Every lesson it's the same old story. You've begged and borrowed and skived and scrounged.
You might think it's funny. You might think he gets what's coming to him. You might be wrong.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming back. So, Paul Holmes, how was that? What do you think make of that film?
Well, this I could talk for an hour about.
You can't.
Well, I can tell you this. I can't remember how old I was when I found out that Kes wasn't a documentary. For many years, I thought it was a documentary. And I would say, if you went around the people of Wakefield, it's the most popular film. It's a litmus test, really, of this area and what you think about this area. For example, I don't think most people outside of Barnsley would know this, but Judd in Barnsley is short for George. And I bet you loads of people have watched that film and never known that. And the other thing, I once chatted to Barry Hines about his book because I once got him to sign it. And the book is called A Kestrel for a Knave, and I'm assuming, I've never discussed this with anybody, that it's based on the fact that in medieval times, that the biggest bird that an ordinary person could own would be a kestrel, because it could only pick mice up and moles, that you had no chance of doing anything. And that film describes the life chances of people in Barnsley, and it certainly describes the life chances of people who failed their 11 plus and ended up going to what we could then call secondary modern schools, because there were armies of people to work in low-paid jobs. You know, I once spoke to Billy Bragg about the film, and he said, well, they were no different in Barking, Paul. They just used to take us around Fords at Barking and show us where we could work in the car factory. And the film is so moving about how life is restricted and the brutalization of people, really. There won't be a person of my generation, a working class male in Yorkshire, who hasn't loathed and detested a PE teacher or a woodwork teacher, mainly because they had something to hand that they could belt you with, because that was what most secondary modern education were about for a lot of people. And the film is beyond realistic. It's a brilliantly written book. The film's fantastic, but it just accurately reflects real life. And I'll finish on this point, because it had what I consider to be a sister film. We want to film it. Were it was on the BBC, a 2-part play called The Price of Coal, which the BBC showed in 1977 about Prince Charles visiting a pit between Barnsley and Rotherham. And I don't think they've ever shown it since. But I've got a mate who worked at the pit, and people say, "Oh, that's horrible, that." He says, "Paul, I would join in the RAF till I saw The Price of Coal. When I saw The Price of Coal, I realised that's where I wanted to work. They're the sort of people that I wanted to work with." And if you watch that film, just like Kes, they were the people I grew up with. It's part of what helped form me. What growing up helps form you. And that shows you what formed the generations that won the 72 and 74 strike, that went into the 84-5 strike. But the life chances they had, they were just fodder for going down there and getting hurt. That's what they were for. And he got hurt above ground as well as his brothers getting hurt below ground. Cheers.
Okay, thanks. Now, before I bring you to in, just for very quick snapshots, there's a question that you can all three think about. Perivision, are there any unusual or pertinent films or music that the Pauls and Ken have seen recently that they can recommend? So while you're pondering that one, back to Kes.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I think Paul said it all really, and it's, but I think a number of films that we've, and certainly the films that Paul and I have done together, which have been over a quarter of a century now, have had somewhere in them the idea about dignity. And I think it relates to why we're all here tonight anyway, which is to help people to see why Paul Holmes would be a good person to lead a union. But it's about dignity, and it's allowing people a life that gives them dignity and security, and contentment, and to be who they can be, and to enjoy the good things in life. You know, not it isn't just doing a film, organising a trade union or whatever. It isn't just about doing the hard graft. It's about finding space for your life, and you can only do that if you've got a secure job and a decent income that gives you that security. And that's where we need strong unions, and that's where we haven't had them. So I mean, this is such a chance, really is a chance to say, look, together we have strength. Individually we're weak, but we only have strength if we use that power to really make the right advances. Stick together, get a decent life, job we know we can keep, doing something that's really valuable, not destroying the planet in the process of the work. You know, having a broader vision, being international, because again, that, you know, Paul, my Paul, as it were, talked about when we did a film about immigrant workers. We realized in that we're all in the same boat. You know, it's one class, as people have said. You know, we're internationalists. We're not. We have to work together, you know, across the world. The people who own businesses, they're the true internationalists. They'll take their investment and invest it in the place where the workers will eat grass. Okay. We have to match their internationalism. We have to show our collective strength across the world. And if we do that, then we can not only get our decent lives for ourselves, but save the planet as well, which is no small issue. So running a big trade union is a huge responsibility, but it's right at the heart, goes right to the heart of power. And to have someone do it who's just got the sense of where people are and where they need to be, and they're not about suits and meetings and with institutional leaders. I don't talk too much, but there's one thing that is just worth saying.
Taking it away from Paul.
yeah. I mean, just really quickly, there was when we did a film back in the 80s about the trade unions then and their failures, and so many of the trade unions leaders were going to the House of Lords, and one person said these trade union leaders in themselves, they have reconciled the conflict of the classes. because they began in the working class and they got out of it and got to the House of Lords, and there they are in the ermine. And in that one person, you see working class become ruling class. And that's what I know Paul Holmes would never do. So anyway, good luck, Paul. And it's been a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Okay, any recommendations of any films?
Oh, golly. There was a friend of ours did one called The Golden Dream, I believe, about Mexicans getting to the battle they have to get into the States and the struggles they have. And then, of course, when they get there, they're doing crap jobs.
Okay. Paul Laverty, have you got any recommendations?
Well, that one by
I mean,
Ken
it's
is
8 o'clock, so we've really got to wrap up. So
okay. Well, maybe I could end up with just because Ken's words reminded me of Milton Friedman, the Chicago boy, and he said something very, very important. You know, a right-wing economist, and he said, you know, in moments of crisis, you know, things and actions can be taken, and only we can use the ideas that are lying around. So, I mean, I think that's a great challenge. I think we have to have a plan. Paul has talked about having a plan. That's what Thatcher had. She had Nicholas Ridley's plan and she implemented it brutally. But I think we let them off the hook after the financial crisis in 2007. So I think we should take Milton Friedman's words at hand, and we have to have ideas around that we can implement as an alternative. And that means being organised, and trade unions have to be the heart of it. And I think that's a massive, massive challenge, and it echoes many of the words that Ken said earlier.
okay, Paul, very briefly, any recommendations on films?
Somebody said to me last week that at least they used to have 9-year-olds working down pit, and it don't happen anymore. I says it does happen, it just don't happen here. It's happening in Colombia. And I watched a film last week that I hadn't seen for 40 years called Treasure of the Sierra Madre with Humphrey Bogart, and I hadn't realised what it's about. Gold mine in the United States, but Walter Houston, John Houston's dad, sits on a bed and explains why gold's worth money because of the labour that goes into the gold, not because gold intrinsically is worth money. And he explains the economic system of the world in about 3 minutes. So I'd recommend that film to everybody. A black and white film from the 50s, Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Thank you for that. Right, so before we go, there was this posted into the chat, which is what Paul's election as General Secretary will do is make sure that we are as a union at the forefront of the struggle to, as Paul has said, scrap anti-trade union laws and restore power to the workers. And that was from John McDonnell MP, who is of course a member of our union. And with that, I think we will wrap up. I just want to say a big, big thank you though for, it's been a privilege chairing this event, as it were. It's quite different for me. It's not the usual meeting I chair. So thanks to Ken Loach, Paul Laverty, and of course yourself, Paul. And really, we've got to work very hard to make sure we get the result that we want and we deserve, and not be crying again at Christmas. So thank you to everybody, but I also want to give a big thank you to people who've worked hard behind the scenes on the technology, which has been really difficult. So that's James, Leon, Dan and John Burgess. Thank you to all of those people for getting it together. And with that, vote Paul, ballot starts 28th of October. It's a bit like Strictly, that sort of announcement, isn't it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.